very much to the speakers on the panel so far this afternoon, and indeed in the morning, for some extremely interesting and thought-provoking presentations. And thank you also to the UIA for the invitation to come and speak about this, about our project, the European Lawyers in Lesvos project, which is an example of the direct assistance that lawyers and bar associations can provide. Now, hopefully, this will work, and I'll be able to go to the next slide, or not. Thank you. So to briefly introduce the project, the European Lawyers in Lesvos project is a joint project organised by the CCBE, which is the Council of Bars and Law Societies of Europe, and the German Bar Association, the DAV. And it came out of, I think, a feeling that seems to be a common feeling shown today through all the speakers and many of the contributions, that we as lawyers and bar associations have a responsibility in certain situations, and particularly to the most vulnerable in society, and particularly to applicants for international protection. So the aim of the European Lawyers in Lesvos project was to send European asylum lawyers to Lesvos to provide pro bono legal assistance to applicants for international protection on Lesvos, and to support the local Greek lawyers in the work that they are doing. It has been operational in Moria since July 2016, and Moria Reception Identification Centre is the main camp on Lesvos, and indeed the main camp in the Greek islands generally. In terms of the structure of the team, we have a team of 12, which is 2 full-time coordinators, myself and a Greek asylum lawyer who's our legal coordinator. We have 6 volunteer lawyers, volunteer European asylum lawyers, 2 interns, one of whom is a German trainee lawyer, and we also have a Dutch intern at the moment, and then 2 interpreters, one in Arabic and one in Farsi. Now, I think it's important to note that all of the lawyers who come to volunteer with the project are qualified and practicing asylum lawyers, and they're all members of European bar associations. So far we've had 65 lawyers from 14 European countries, and what we have done and what we do is we focus on providing first instance legal advice to applicants for international protection. So in Greece, and common to most European jurisdictions, there is often a 2-stage process when it comes to asylum law. There's the first instance interview, which in Greece is slightly different in that there is an extra stage in terms of whether somebody is admissible to have their interview, their asylum interview in Greece, or whether they should be returned to Turkey to have their asylum application considered in Turkey. And then there is also the eligibility stage. And what we do is provide legal assistance at both of those stages, which in some cases may be separate, in some cases may be rolled into one. What we don't do, and I think this is important to note, is that we have delineated what we do quite precisely. So we provide assistance at first instance, but we don't do any appeal work. The reason for that is that, as I'll go into in greater depth later, there is what is effectively a legal aid scheme in Greece to provide assistance at the appeal stage, and one of the very important principles of operating this project is that we work in collaboration with the local bar association and the local lawyers, and not in any sense in competition. In terms of what we have done so far, we have advised on over 1,260 cases, 950 of which are first instance legal advice. The remainder are family reunification work. We're based up, as I mentioned, in Moria camp. We have 4 rooms there where we can provide private one-on-one consultations. And I think another important point, which links into what we were talking about earlier in terms of the rule of law, is that we provide assistance to everybody, all nationalities, irrespective of any consideration, irrespective of nationality, of strength of case, of any consideration. If somebody is at the first instance stage, we will provide assistance. Here's, and I'm not sure if it's going to be visible, but and these statistics are on our website if you're interested in seeing them in greater detail. It illustrates the population makeup of the applicants we have advised. In particular, the largest population that we have advised are Afghans, Syrians, people from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Eritreans, Iranians, and a variety of other nationalities. It also provides a breakdown of the nationality of the lawyers who have come. So far we've had lawyers from France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Iceland, the Czech Republic, Poland, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Italy, Spain, Switzerland, Greece, and Denmark. So the question as to why the project was set up and why the CCB and the DAV have decided that to create a project to send volunteer asylum lawyers to Lesvos. First and foremost, we believe that access to legal assistance and the right to speak to a lawyer is a fundamental right. And indeed, the rule of law can only be upheld if people have access to a lawyer. Indeed, in particular, asylum is an extremely complex legal process, particularly in Greece, and therefore it's vital, as we've heard already today, that to have a specialist lawyer to guide you through the process and to provide assistance in order for people to be able to present their case in a way that reflects their need for international protection. In terms of why Lesvos, well, as I'm sure you all know from the media reports, Lesvos is the epicenter of the so-called refugee crisis. Between March 2015 and March 2016, around 600,000 people passed through the island. And after the EU-Turkey statement of the 20th of March 2016, people who have arrived after that date now remain on Lesvos whilst their application for international protection is considered, which has led to a build-up of a significant number of people on the island. Indeed, at one point there was 4,000 people, more than 4,000 people in Moria camp itself, which, given that it has a capacity for about 1,200, illustrates the overcrowded conditions there. As I touched upon briefly earlier, in Greece there is no legal aid at the first instance stage. There is for people at the appeal stage, so if you apply and are rejected at first instance, you will be provided a free Greek lawyer to conduct your appeal. However, what we found was that actually in many cases that was too late. People had gone into their interview without having spoken to a lawyer, had said things that they wouldn't have said if they were advised, and then by the time they got a Greek lawyer and got legal advice at the appeal stage, it was too late to reverse what they had said at first instance. Indeed, in Greece in particular, the first instance interview is the crucial part of the process, because it's the only time at which the applicant actually is able to present his or her case. At the appeal stage, it becomes a procedural, more of a procedural matter where it's done on written submissions and considered on the papers. So we consider that providing expert asylum advice at the first instance stage is absolutely fundamental in importance, particularly because in Lesvos in general, the level of knowledge about asylum amongst the applicants is very low. Indeed, in some cases, it's actually almost negative in terms of people have completely incorrect concepts of asylum, mostly as a result of the information fed to them by smugglers in order to try and secure, to convince people to make the journey. So even more than a year after the EU-Turkey statement, which effectively closed or was restricted people's onward movement from Lesvos and indeed from Greece generally, people still come and say, that they expect to be in Germany in 2 weeks, which is, of course, completely incorrect. So there is a general lack of knowledge about the asylum procedure, and indeed, as I mentioned earlier, the local Greek lawyers, under extreme stress as a result of this influx of applicants for international protection, and our view was that actually, given that there are so many cases and so much preparation needed, that as European asylum lawyers, we could help take the burden off the local Greek lawyers by providing the assistance that we can provide, namely at the first instance stage, where the principles are common or relatively common across Europe in terms of what a first instance interview is and the Geneva Convention, to leave the local Greek lawyers the space and the opportunity to provide the assistance where it becomes a specialist Greek procedure, in particular at the appeal stage. So overall, we felt that there was a responsibility as lawyers and as bar associations to assist, both to support the local Greek lawyers and indeed the applicants for international protection on Lesvos. In terms of what in concrete terms we do and what we provide. So as I've mentioned, we provide pro bono asylum law assistance and advice for applicants at the first instance stage. So what that involves is that we will meet people who have never, or well, not in this context, at least spoken to a lawyer before. We'll explain to them what asylum is, what the Greek procedure is, what the asylum process is in Greece, and then we'll provide legal advice relating to their case. So what that normally involves is listening to someone's case and then going through it with them, identifying the strengths and weaknesses in their case, what may be relevant or irrelevant in terms of asylum, identifying what information maybe we could help them provide through, we could conduct research to get additional information about their country of origin, help them obtain evidence. Obviously, as we all know as lawyers, original evidence is vital in any kind of procedure. And in particular, what an important element of what we do is to actually get people to be in a position whereby they are comfortable to talk about the experiences that they have had. And this was mentioned in one of the earlier presentations by Peggy Hicks, that actually, in many cases, people without having spoken to a lawyer, without having received advice, it's very difficult for them to be comfortable in talking about the trauma that they've experienced. So what we do is we provide a minimum of 2 interview preparations, up to a maximum of 4 or 5 in some particularly complicated cases, in order to try and get people prepared and indeed comfortable so that when they go into their interview, they're able to articulate their case. We then will assist people after their interview, collect their transcript, go through their transcript and submit any additional documents that or documents or evidence that may be useful. In terms, very briefly, of family reunification, we help identify people who may be potential reunification cases. We'll help them collect the documents and then prepare their reunification application. We also provide general advice and guidance about, in relation to queries that we receive about the process. As I mentioned, in Greece, the asylum process is complex and indeed ever-changing, and quite often we will we'll go through different changes, different new procedures, and so obviously we'll field and answer questions that we receive about that. Just to give a couple of examples as to why in particular having a lawyer is valuable. Of course, the interview preparation that we provide is in many cases of absolute fundamental importance. But another couple of examples that may not immediately spring to mind. Firstly, in terms of vulnerability and identifying vulnerable cases. Under the Greek asylum procedure, the being marked or identified as vulnerable is very, very important. It puts you into effectively a different legal process. What we have found is that actually many people do not disclose many of their medical issues immediately upon arrival, particularly because they have arrived, they don't know what to expect, they've just undergone a traumatic journey by boat from Turkey, and suddenly they're confronted by a variety of people in uniform asking them questions. This, I think, comes as a surprise, and for many cases they're simply not ready or comfortable to talk about the trauma that they have experienced. So that means that their medical vulnerabilities or psychological vulnerabilities are not identified. So what we do is we will, after a consultation with somebody who presents potential vulnerabilities, we will work with them and work with the other actors, particularly the medical actors, to try and get the evidence that is necessary to demonstrate that they are vulnerable. Now, to take an example, there was a lady who came to us who had been a survivor of SGBV both in her home country and indeed in Turkey. She had become pregnant as a result of this, had been forced to undergo an abortion in a Turkish jail, had then come to Lesvos and of course not disclosed any of this upon arrival, and so was marked as clinically healthy. Now, what we did was to talk to her, to prepare her, to get her comfortable about talking about this trauma, then got the medical evidence to support what she said, presented this and got her marked as vulnerable. This is not something that would have been possible without legal assistance. Another similar example relates to the situation of unaccompanied minors, in particular minors or applicants who have been considered to be adults and registered as adults but claim to be minors. This is a very significant problem in Moria. There's at least 60 applicants who we're aware of who claim to be minors but have been registered as adults. Again, this is a complicated legal process to try and reverse that assessment. It involves trying to get original documentation, it involves making various applications and presenting this documentation to the asylum service, and it involves repeated meetings with the asylum service to try and get the age assessment overturned. Again, this is something that simply wouldn't be possible without legal assistance and would result, in fact, in minors, people who are under 18, going to their interview without any support, without any documentary evidence, and being treated as adults. And very finally, final example, we've talked a lot about detention, and of course in Moria people are under detention. Again, what we do is we will go to the detention facility and we will speak to the people there, provide them with first instance advice. And one example of the value of legal assistance at this point is there was an applicant who had been in detention for a number of months and was a potential vulnerable case, but his claim was completely stuck in the asylum process. And this was just a very practical matter of just repeatedly going to the asylum service, raising this issue, talking about his case, pushing his case to try and get a decision, submitting additional evidence to the point that actually this person, as a result of our legal intervention, was not only released from detention, but actually the same day he was released, he was given his decision, which was a positive decision recognising him as a refugee. And this illustrates that actually, if he hadn't had legal assistance, he could have stayed in detention for a number of months, even though actually he had a refugee recognition pending. Just a couple of examples in terms of the conditions in the camp, and this is more to illustrate I think the need and the duty and responsibility that we as lawyers have, in that people are in Moria living under extremely difficult conditions and in many cases the most vulnerable in society, and it's an obligation upon us to try and assist them as much as we can. This photo was taken in January of this year when the camp, and you can see maybe that most of the accommodation there is tents, and most of the tents are under a couple of feet of snow. This is a photo taken from October last year when there was a fire in the camp, and about 1,000 tents burnt down in total, again, which creates a particularly difficult scenario in which people live, and also in which people wait for months whilst they wait for their determination of their application. So, in conclusion, as lawyers and members of bar associations, we have the responsibility to provide pro bono legal assistance to applicants for international protection where there is no legal aid system in place at the first instance stage, for example in Greece. Applicants for international protection are amongst the most vulnerable, as we've heard many times today. In Greece, for example, they arrive with no or very little money, but with very little understanding of the process, speaking a completely different language, in many cases having fled atrocities both in their home country and on the way, and are under a restriction of movement. We, as lawyers, have a responsibility to assist. Fundamentally, asylum is a legal process, and so lawyers are the only ones who can guide people through this process to ensure that their rights are realised and to ensure that the rule of law is upheld. And just to conclude on this, on the slide you will see that what I think is a demonstration of the value of legal assistance in concrete terms. Out of the Greek national average of recognition and the granting of international protection in 2016 was 29%. Of the applicants who we have advised and have received decisions, 56% of them have received international protection. Now, I think what that demonstrates is that there is potentially 25% of people, at least in Greece, who have a strong asylum claim but have not been able to present their case in the best possible way simply because they haven't received legal assistance. Now, of course, these statistics are not necessarily representative. They're a small sample size, but I think that the underlying message is an accurate one. We also help people navigate this complex and confusing process. For example, 81 of the 1,200 applicants that we have advised, we've able to be accepted into the family reunification process, and so they've left the camp, left Lesbos and gone to Athens to continue their reunification process under the Dublin regulation. 185 applicants have been recognised as vulnerable and again moved from the camp to Athens. As I touched upon briefly before, another example of the value of legal assistance is in terms of psychological and psychosocial support. As Peggy Hicks mentioned earlier, actually it's one of the most valuable things that can be provided is actually being somebody to whom applicants can tell their story to for the first time. People in Moria, people on Lesbos, and people I think in asylum processes generally often feel dehumanized by the process and marginalized by the process. And I think it's vital to give people the opportunity to tell their story and to feel and to know that there are people and lawyers fighting for them. As Volker Turk mentioned earlier today, I think another element of the importance of legal assistance and the presence of lawyers is in terms of oversight over the procedure and to ensure that legal norms are adhered to. And indeed, actually, that the presence of lawyers and the assistance of lawyers in cases helps speed up the process. Cases are not lost through lack of communication or misunderstanding. Having a lawyer assist with the case generally improves the efficiency and the speed at which the case is determined. As I mentioned earlier, one of the key principles of the project is collaboration with local lawyers, and I believe that under the overarching responsibility that we have is a responsibility to collaborate and work together. We don't want to compete with other organisations or to duplicate. Indeed, this would be entirely counterproductive. Rather, we want to provide, and we aim to provide, assistance that local Greek lawyers cannot, yet work with the local Greek lawyers to, for example, pass on cases that we prepare at first instance when it gets to the appeal stage. And I think it's important to remember that, for example, we are one piece of the jigsaw in Lesvos. We provide assistance at one stage. Of course, we need to collaborate with people at the appeal stage. It's vital to have people doing strategic litigation. As was mentioned earlier, we need to have lawyers doing advocacy work to raise these issues at a national and European level. So I think part of the responsibility we have when working in relation to refugees is the responsibility to work together. And finally, I just want to take the opportunity to pay tribute to the volunteer lawyers. I think it's a wonderful reflection on the legal profession that we've had so many lawyers from volunteering their time for a minimum of 3 weeks each, in some cases volunteering more than once, to come to Lesvos and who have in total devoted over 11,000 voluntary hours to the project. Each lawyer, each volunteer brings an entirely unique perspective and experience, and as we know, it's the nature of lawyers to think freely, to challenge and to push boundaries, and this is one of the great benefits and joys of working with volunteer lawyers in a project like this. All of the volunteer lawyers have been excellent ambassadors for the project and for Europe more generally. It's been a privilege to work with them and a credit to their bar associations and to their profession. With that, I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and to thank the CCB and the DAV for their support with this project, and finally to thank all of the volunteer lawyers for their assistance.